Sex can be the consummation of intimacy, but it is not the definition of intimacy.
Today, we're diving into a topic that deeply affects lives and relationships: porn addiction. Our guest is Matt Wenger, clinical director of the Begin Again Institute.
There's really not a safe amount of pornography.
Porn makes you worse at sex. It's highly correlated with sexual dysfunction.
What sex and porn addiction does is it sexualizes that need. So the only way that I can get that need met is in a sexual arena.
In this episode, we explore how childhood trauma can fuel compulsive behavior, why true intimacy goes beyond sex, and how rewiring empathy is key to healing. Matt's expertise gives us a fresh perspective on what real recovery looks like.
There's this huge overlap between childhood trauma and porn and sex addictions. When we're teaching guys how to recover from porn addiction and sex addiction, teaching them how to stop doing the thing, we're actually teaching them how to be.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with Matt Wenger. He is the clinical director of the Begin Again Institute, which is an institute that focuses specifically on porn addiction. They're located in Boulder, Colorado. And what I love about them that I think is really unique is that they use an intensive model. They do these 14-week, really intensive work where they work with guys or people that are struggling with a porn addiction. And what is also really cool is that they offer support for partners and families, which I think is pretty rare in this industry. So Matt, I'm excited to have you on the show, learn more about porn addiction, learn more about your facility. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. We are a 14-day intensive, not 14-week. So that might be important to clarify.
That is critical. 4 days. So it's 2 weeks of really intensive work where guys can really focus on their addiction and overcoming that. So I'm curious for you, how did you get into this work? What was your motivation?
Well, that's interesting. I think I'm kind of unique in the field in that, I don't have a personal experience with porn or sex addiction. But what I did do in my professional career before getting into this kind of niche work was trauma therapy with children. So there's this huge overlap between childhood trauma and porn and sex addiction. So that's kind of how I stepped into it. And then what was kind of odd about once I started to learn more about the experience of men in recovery, porn and sex was, some wounds in my own life that I hadn't really been paying that close attention to really came up in, vacancy issues with emotionally growing up where, our family didn't really talk about emotions, didn't really talk about our feelings, didn't communicate that much. And so I started to feel through some of my own stuff when I got into this and did some work on myself, which was really special for me to do that. So I don't know. It's I think, it's turned out to be like a lot of careers. You step into it and then you kind of find a niche thing that you do, and that just becomes part of what you're known for. But I have a real heart for this population and for betrayed partners, and so I get a lot of fulfillment and satisfaction out of working with guys and seeing families get better and seeing families heal from around this issue.
Yeah, so I'm curious, after deep diving around this and talking to tons of people and families about it, had your view on porn changed? Was it something that you considered or even thought about before going into it? And what is it like now?
Yeah, I don't know if it's changed that much. I think I've learned a lot more about it. My personal value set was that porn was not a good thing. It wasn't a and other people have different values around that thing. But one thing that we could all agree on was that compulsivity around the use of pornography and sex was not a good thing. That when it became not something that's wanted, but something that's needed to be okay, to make it through my day, to feel grounded or connected, or some relief from intense feelings of anxiety or depression or whatever, well, then that's not good. And I guess what happened for me as I got involved with the statistics around pornography in studies around pornography, that what came out of that was, and this is hard to say, I think, in our culture today, but there's really not a safe amount of pornography for your mental health. It's not good for your mental health in any quantity, and people struggle with that. And you can say the same. What I hear back is true. You can say the same thing about cheeseburgers or cigarettes or television or whatever. Like, there's not necessarily good for you, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. But I am okay with people having different values around that. But what I seek to do in our work is, how do we help somebody move out of compulsivity? How do we help them move out of what thing that's damaging their lives and their family and hurting people? And we don't have to share the same value of whether or not pornography is all good or all bad or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's very common in recovery communities, right? Some people are for abstinence, some people are for moderation, some people are for, tight containment around use. But so I'm curious, around your statement there of no porn is good. Can you expand on that a little bit? Like, what do you mean by that? And how is it different from like, a cheeseburger or, one drink or whatever, right? Like, how would you make that case?
Well, I think the studies show that it has a negative effect on the consumer's ability to empathize with people that they're sexually attracted to. So porn, exposure to porn, like from the studies and statistically, like lowers the amount of empathy that I have for other people. It increases my likelihood that I will engage with other people in a passive way that views them as an object. So another way of saying that simply is just objectifying, people in public, and being less curious about them as persons and being more curious about them from just their bodies or, the physical aspects of a person. And there's all sorts of ways in which that can go south. There's also studies that have shown that your sexual health and your sexual satisfaction goes down the more porn that you consume. So your ability to achieve orgasm when you want to, the ability to, have an erection or whatever when you want to, and then how satisfied you are with your sex life. And then how satisfied your partner is with your sexual experience. Like, all those things go down the more porn that someone consumes. So there are some odd studies out there, and I mean odd by like they're rare. There's a handful of studies that will say that the opposite is true, that pornography in moderation can increase, your sex, the pleasure that you have in sex, or your freedom in sex, or your exploration in sex. And people from different communities, like the kink community and, LGBTQ community, they have a lot of different opinions on these kinds of things. And like I said, I don't require everybody to share my values about these things, but the majorities of the studies will show that it's not a good thing. But I don't know. What do you think when I explain that? I mean, what are you hearing? There are.
Yeah. I mean, I've had that experience personally and with a lot of guys where I think porn makes you worse at sex. I think that's a big one, right? And it's highly correlated with sexual dysfunction. Like I struggle with premature ejaculation, and cutting out porn, like, literally fixed that problem. Like, that was the problem, right? I had trained myself to orgasm like as fast as possible, right? And be overstimulated. And I know a lot of guys have that, or they have erectile dysfunction, or the other side, right? Where they, have seen so much porn that they are kind of deconditioned to everything and can't even achieve orgasm. So I've certainly seen that. I think I've seen the objectification thing, again, in my own life and in peers and in colleagues, especially as a young adult, because, for a lot of us growing up as millennials, like porn was our sex education. Like I didn't really receive sex education beyond like anatomy in high school, so for a long time, I thought that porn was sex. And I thought that all the different positions and the, fast tempo and also how a girl should act, like that they're supposed to be like screaming and begging and like fucking so into it, right? Like when I was hooking up with like real humans, I was like, oh, that's not what porn and what sex looks like, right? Like they're not the same thing. Porn, sexual entertainment, it's not sexual education. So, I mean, yeah, I think it does really skew what sex and what intimacy even looks like for a lot of people. And I think a lot of men, that is our kind of template for what sexual encounters should be like.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really insightful angle there of yeah, what effect does that have on, first of all, like what it means to be a man, perhaps. What does it mean to sexually satisfy a partner? What is it is safe? And look, we could go on for a really long time about just the word intimacy and what porn says about intimacy and how sex and intimacy are conflated in pornography, and all the damage that does, not just to partnered relationships, but to relationships with children and just your friends and family, your ability to be emotionally intimate with everyone else. If you've conflated sex and intimacy right through exposure to pornography or an education about sex through pornography, right? So honestly, there is just as big a fallout in the emotional realm as there is in the relationship realm for porn addicts. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to dig into the intimacy piece because it just made me flash back to a particular client who talked about sexual intimacy, right? And was educated highly on porn. And what he said, I'm just curious if you see this with some of the people that you work with. He said that for him, intimacy was that his partner would trust him to be aggressive and rough and like demeaning of her, right? Because that's what we saw in porn, is that a lot of that porn is very aggressive, it's very violent, it's like very rapid fire. It doesn't have like, it's not slow, there's no eye gazing, there's no sweet tenderness, right? Like it's just like jackhammer. And he was like, oh, I'm into it with my wife at the time because she lets me be really rough with her and she trusts me. Versus, I think, cutting off like the whole wider spectrum of what intimacy could look like, rather than just like allowing somebody to hurt you, or to like go full primal. I'm curious if you've encountered that, or you've heard of that, or what your kind of take is on the broader spectrum of intimacy.
Well, I think what you're describing there is a sexualization of an emotional need. So I want my wife to trust me. I want to be trusted. Well, what sex and porn addiction does is it sexualizes that need. So the only way that I can get that need met is in a sexual arena. Like, she will trust me if she lets me do this. She trusts me if I'm allowed to do this. Infinite amount of possibilities there in terms of like the amount of or type and kind of sexual acting out, right? So, I would ask that guy if he was sitting in front of me in my office about where that need for trust comes from, and what would it look like for you to take that out of the sexual arena. If I could achieve connection and trust with my wife outside of that. And then down the road, perhaps we can look at what does trust look like in sexual behavior or sexual intimacy with my wife. But we have to establish first that this isn't the only way in which trust can be established. And it might not even be, and it probably is not the best way for trust to be established. there's a, I don't know what you think, Mark, but like there's a bigger narrative there for this guy about like, where did that idea even come from? You know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, long story short, abusive childhood and kind of like linking violence with love and, all that kind of stuff. And needing to be trusted by, letting him hurt somebody else, and like be himself, right? Is kind of how he said.
Perhaps we can, well, isn't that sad? Isn't that sad? Like that this is the expression of myself. Well, yourself is not, perhaps we can, I don't think yourself is violent. I don't think your authentic self is, hurtful. I don't think your authentic self is who you are, and who you want to have sex with. And like, there's deeper parts of our identity than who we're attracted to and who we want to have sex with and who, and what kind of sex we want to have with them. But what you're describing there, and you know this, right, is this, well, not only have I sexualized my need for trust, but I'm actually reenacting my trauma in my sexual behavior, right, of mingling trust and violence. And that the confusion of that internally, I'm working that out sexually. And is that the best arena for that to be worked out? If I'm perhaps we can unaware of it or unconscious of it. And the answer to that question is probably no. Perhaps we can.
Yeah, probably not. Like, you should go to therapy, which is what he was doing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, trying to find like a healthier way to work on that. I want to go back to the like be yourself thing, because I do hear that from a lot of guys where, especially if they're that kind of nice guy archetype that we've talked about a lot on this show, of like people pleasing, often kind of like quiet, kind of meek, kind of like making space for other people. I found there's a high correlation between that and like extreme sexual behavior. Because when I talk to these guys, they say, hey, I have this other side of me that's just like, sexual god or sexual deviant or whatever they want to say. And they feel like they're really themselves in that. They feel like they're like, they can get love that they can trust, for instance, because it's like so close and intimate, right? They feel like they're being desired. They feel like they have value. I'm curious for you, when you work with guys like that, like, how do you disentangle that? Because they're, like you said, they're getting their needs met in that way. They've found a way to get it met. It's probably not the best way, and it's certainly very limiting, and it can really cause problems in your life, but there is some wisdom in that, like there is something that they need to have happen.
Well, I mean, just notice that the juxtaposition there, like I'm really meek, or I feel maybe powerless or disempowered or deferential. These guys are, certain guys that come into treatment with sex addiction or porn addiction, some of that population, not all of it, but some of that population is this people pleaser, right? There's this, I'll go with whatever you say, and that's fine. You pick the restaurant, you pick where we go on vacation. You pick, like, it's up to you. I don't really have needs. I don't really,
So I'm curious about this archetype of man, this kind of nice guy syndrome thing that we talk a lot about on the show, right? It's the guy that in his real life is kind of meek or people pleasing or really deferential. Like, he really just feels, I don't know, small, right? But on the other side, they often have a lot of sexual deviancy or sexual acting out. And they talk about in sex, they can be themselves, right? They can be, they can feel powerful. They can feel in control. They can feel like they're desired, that they're wanted. I'm curious if you notice that in some of the work that you do, and how you work with people like that have almost just like, not bipolar in a mental health sense, but kind of like black and white world.
Yeah. I would, again, like, for me, it always comes back to needs. So what I said to you earlier still stands, right? That these needs become sexualized. So what's the need there? The need is, I need to have my needs validated. I need to be seen. I need to be heard. I need to feel like I have agency or choice. And that for me is going to exist over here in this like sexual compartment. It's not going to, my regular life is over here. And what they don't understand, those guys, is that there is a rising level of frustration, resentment, and anger over here that they're in complete denial about. So they can be the nice guy, the meek guy, the deferential guy, the whatever you want, it's up to you, that's fine kind of guy. And then what they'll feel like is, I'm getting to express a part of me over here,
So
but it's in this quote like forbidden area. I'm not allowed to have needs in my regular life. I'm forbidden to have needs. That's not okay, right? Because of my upbringing or my family or whatever. And over here, I'm allowed to have needs, and I'm allowed to express those needs, and I'm allowed to, you know, and these guys are typically not drawing that dividing line between relationship with their committed partner and a sexual relationship with their committed partner. It's usually different people, or it's their marriage and how they act out in their use of pornography. Because this person over here can't accept that I have needs, or that I um, uh, have agency or choice, right? They need to be in charge, and I'll let them be in charge, right? And I'll get my needs met over here. And so what, like, these guys need to learn is that you're not two separate people, right? You're in denial in this category that you have needs. You're also in denial over here that you can get those needs met outside of sexual behavior by expressing yourself. Now, don't hear me. I know you won't, but like people that may be listening, like, don't hear me like, oh, that you can just go around and like pound your fist on the table and like, I have needs, and you're gonna meet them, and that's what they told me to do, on this podcast thing. And that's not it at all. It's that your needs are valid, but the other person's needs are too. And that's how human relationships are navigated in a healthy way. It's like, how do we express ourselves and hear each other? Mark, when this goes over here into this sexual compartment and it only exists there, I'm actually not acknowledging that the other person has needs either. I'm flipping the script, and I'm just here to get my needs met. I don't really care about them and what's going on for them. And so when they say that, Mark, I can be myself over here. Well, then that begs the question, like, who is that person? Who is that self? Let's talk about him. And like, why can't he exist over here? What are the barriers, right? And what's the harm being done when you divide yourself up that way? And what's the harm happening to people that you love when they may not know about your life over here in the sexual compartment?
Yeah, so I'm hearing is like, it's all about integration is big, right? Like kind of extracting the wisdom or extracting the needs from the side of being like, okay, how do you live it out in your real life with the people that really matter? Because yeah, I think when you ask like, who is that self? I know a lot of these guys, because they feel like they don't have needs in their real life, when it's time for sex, they're like, okay, now it's my time. Now it's my time to really go. And just like you mentioned, it can often result in objectifying your partner or using your partner, right? Not really being in tune and not having connective sex at all, actually, almost just using them to masturbate or using them to satisfy a fantasy rather than really connecting with that person that's right there in front of you.
Right. Exactly right. And so here's what I'd say to guys, right, is that there are about 20 or 25, maybe more, like actual human needs that we all have, right? And you and I could probably name them, right? Love, connection, attunement, affirmation, being seen, being heard, comfort, all of these things, right? We could go on and name some of them. Those, what's interesting about those is those fall into the category of what we call attachment needs. These are needs that everybody has. These are needs that little children have, and they're needs that you still have. And what someone who's addicted to sex or pornography will tell you is that these needs are directly related to my sexual behavior, and I will get them through my sexual behavior. And that is just absolutely 100% not true. Like, sex was not designed for that, and it can't give you those things. It's not for that. You can tell yourself a story that sex can give you those things, and maybe they can even be quite convincing with their story about how sex gives them these things. But at the end of the day, sex is only good for a few things, right? Procreation and bonding. And that's pretty much it, right? What I tell guys is that sex can be the consummation of intimacy, but it is not the definition of intimacy. It can be a place where my needs and connection to my needs is present, but it is not the only way in which I'm going to get those things. It's not for that. It can't do those things for you, right? It's what we call it. It's why we call it a process addiction, where that we're addicted to the process, addicted to the behavior in a way to adjust my mood and my feelings and regulate my nervous system. And I tell myself little stories about it, right? Like, oh, I need a drink to calm down. Or, I've had a tough day. I just need a drink to relax. Or, oh, I'm really down. I needed some cocaine just to like give me some energy. Like, whatever. Like substance abusers, they tell themselves little stories too, and sex is no different.
I agree. I really like what you said, that that sex is a way to like consummate intimacy, not create it. Can you share, like, because some guys might not know, like, what are some other ways you can be intimate? Right? Because I think like the media and our culture has distilled it into sex. If people say like I had intimate time with my partner, people immediately are like, oh yeah, you're boning, right? I mean, it's like it is really connected, I think, in common parlance. So what are some other ways that people can be intimate?
Yeah. Well, what we say here in our program is vulnerability plus authenticity equals intimacy, right? You probably heard that before, right? Vulnerability plus authenticity equals intimacy. So if I am vulnerable with you and I am myself with you, or I am connected to myself with you, present to myself, then I have the ability to have an intimate connection with you. But let's flip that around. What's the problem then with porn and sex addiction? Well, I can't be vulnerable with you because I'm worried that you're going to judge me, or that my proclivities or my porn habits or my genres or the frequency at which I act out, like that, there's shame attached to that for me. So I can't be fully vulnerable with you. In fact, I may be lying to you about some of those things, right? So there's no intimacy there. And the person that you may know me to be is a carefully curated version of what I think that you will like, or what I think I need to be liked, because I didn't get those attachment needs met as a kid. So I had to kind of figure it out on my own and be this type of person and be likable. And the one thing that I never feel like is myself. We have a question at the top of our first piece of our workbook of our program, where it says, tell us who you are, where you live, tell about your family, what's your acting out behaviors, and what you want to get out of this program, right? And guys all the time get stuck on that first question, because they're like, well, do I talk about my job? Do I talk about where I live? Do I talk about who am I? What do you mean? Tell me who? Like, they have this deep-seated panic that they don't know who they are. So I can't be vulnerable and I can't be authentic. So I don't have a shot at being intimate with you. Like, I can't. And so, like, I have to go to sexual behaviors to find intimacy, because I can't bring those two other things to the table. So I bring some faux vulnerability or some false vulnerability in the form of, nakedness or whatever. And I will bring some false authenticity in that, I'm not going to give you who I really am. I'm just kind of a sexual being in this space. Or I'll have a barrier up between like the screen, right? Or the camera, or whatever it is. There's some barrier keeping me from it, keeping me at a safe distance from it, which is ultimately the root of what pornography provides, right? Like a false version of intimacy with people think they're getting everything that they want out of intimacy with no risk, right? Because I'm I'm back here and I'm not going to be hurt. So, um, what we're teaching guys how to recover from porn addiction and sex addiction. We're not actually teaching them we're not only teaching them how to stop doing the thing. We're actually teaching them how to be vulnerable and how to be connected with themselves, and then how to be a safe person that can accept other people's vulnerability and authenticity. And then, sex becomes a totally different experience for you in that zone. And there is healing there that can happen over time.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. I first got exposed to that in my recovery work and talking to other addicts, right? This idea of like not knowing who I am, right? Not feeling empty. When I look inside, I'm like, what am I? I mean, am I my roles? Am I my hobbies? Like, is it what I know about, right? And I think a lot of men, whether you're in recovery or not, or an addict or not, like, I think we feel that a lot. A lot of my guys don't know who they are and aren't able to really they get scared by that question because I think it pokes at this sense of internal emptiness. So I'm curious for you, like, how do you help guys build that sense of self? Because I'm hearing that's critical in this like long-term recovery process, right? It's like, okay, one thing to stop looking at porn and do the behavior modification. It's all another thing to really develop a sense of self that doesn't include porn in that way, Yeah,
I think there's kind of this existential reality here. And I'll describe it by this example, okay? When I used to work with kids that were in traumatized environments, and then some kids that were struggling in school with ADD or whatever else, right? There was this marked difference between kids who felt love from their parents, so not just knew they were loved, but felt that they were loved, and kids who didn't. So the kids who felt and experienced and knew that they were loved, all of those bits, right? Not just like, I have this idea that I'm loved, or parents ought to love their kids, so I'm probably loved. No, but they had a felt experience of it, despite what they were struggling with. They did not have an identity problem at all. Their identity was just that. I am Timmy or James or Lauren, and I am loved. The kids that didn't receive those things were asking themselves all of these other questions of who I am and am I a good boy? Am I a good kid? Am I smart? They're asking themselves all of these other questions, and they start to ask their helpers all these questions too, and in all these little ways, right? But people and children who experience love do not have identity crises. Another way that I say it is like, crisis. A tree does not have an identity crisis. It knows what it is. It's a tree, right? It just is what it is. And you, Mark, you are who you are. Crises. My access to that identity is really about whether or not I am connected to it in love. Was I loved for who I was, or was I loved for what I could do? Was I loved for who I was, or was I loved for what I provided for my family, or whatever? Crises. Or was I loved for who I was, or was I known? Was I accepted? These kinds of questions, right? So what does that look like in an adult man's work? Crises. Do you love who you are? Crises. Can you gather all the memories of your childhood and your young life and your young adult life and your married life and hold them and say, this went well, this didn't go well, this was good and this was bad. But I love crises, this person. I love this little boy. I love this teenager. I love this young adult. I love this husband. Like, it was for all his flaws, right? Can I appreciate and love those parts of me and all the good and bad that came with them? And most guys that struggle with porn and sex in a compulsive fashion are dealing with immense levels of shame around that. And they'll say, no, I don't like that kid. He got me in a lot of trouble. I don't like that teenager. He got hooked on porn. I don't like that adult because he betrayed his wife and hurt her deeply. And I hate those parts of me, and I don't want to sit with them, and I don't want to welcome them, and I don't want to greet them and comfort them. Right. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I see in the work, like really slowing down and sitting with those bits there.
Yeah, I think that's critical because, I mean, the shame is obviously a huge gateway to porn use, and it creates that kind of dual life thing that we were talking about a little bit earlier, right? And like you said, yeah, it creates like a cycle that people kind of get into. And yeah, I think if there's love and if there's identity, it is very expansive, but it means being able to tap into the expansiveness. You know, I think a lot of men, like it's very conditional, right? We're lovable when we're performing, when we're, you know, doing good in sports or doing good in school, or, you know, when we have a hot girlfriend or when we like, you know, get the good job. But then the minute we don't have those status markers, I think our self-love just goes in the toilet, you know, and a lot of guys' sense of self is so externally driven. So what I'm hearing you say, it's about loving the person, right? Not the medals, not the, you know, not the achievements, but really loving you and seeing the full story versus just focusing on the outcome.
Yeah, and I think a lot of betrayed partners struggle with that because when they hear that this guy really needs to learn to connect with himself and love himself, and then he can learn how to connect with you and love you, they feel like that's out of order. No, like he needs to learn to connect with me and love me. That's the problem here. And actually, that's not why he acts out at all. He's not acting out because he doesn't love you or care about you, or he may care about you a lot, but he only thinks his needs are going to get met over here, and he doesn't feel like his emotional needs are even always legitimate. Another thing I want to say about developing identity, when you think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If I'm not getting my basic needs met for like safety and security and consistency, then I'm going to be in survival mode. And kids that are in survival mode do not get to explore the world with freedom and safety. They don't get to involve themselves in hobbies and interests in the same way. They don't get to be introspective on any level. They're worried about the day-to-day things of, am I going to be okay? You know, and that could be either because their parents are disconnected from them, or their parents or people in their lives are dangerous. So there's a process there where, like I said, kids that are loved, they get the freedom to explore their environment and safety, right? And so that their identity development is on track. But kids that are unsafe, they don't get to explore the world and figure out who they are, or even get feedback from their parents. Like, one of the things that guys miss out on all the time is that feedback from their same-sex parent. So what attachment theory will tell you is that, like, my same-sex parent is going to help me understand who I am, because they're like me, right? Dad's like me. I'm a boy. Dad's a boy, right? Or, I'm a girl. Mom's a girl. So what am I like? And then the opposite sex parent tells you what the world is like, what the other is like, right? Because they're not like me. So if dad is disconnected, then I don't really get to get that feedback from him of like what it's like to be a man, or what it's like, what does it mean to be, maleness? What is boyness, right? And if my mom is unsafe, then the world is dangerous, right? So we get these kind of archetypal setups where guys really struggle in their identity development. And so as an adult in their work, it's really about creating consistency and safety, toning down the volume on the chaos and the disruptions in their lives so that they can do that work of who am I and is the world. Like, Mark, for instance, how many guys have you worked with that are so obsessed with the circumstances that they are in versus their ability to navigate and feel through their life?
Oh, for sure. I think most of them, right? I think we're like very externally driven, and it's like, the crisis of the week versus, who am I in this storm that is life? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what is my choice? What is my power in this environment? And guys that didn't do that identity development work, don't have a strong sense of who they are, they'll say, well, maybe I'll get better when my wife comes down, or maybe things will be better when I get this job, or I get a new job, or this, or that, or, oh my gosh, we got into this big argument and blah, blah. And it's like, who are you in the argument? Who are you in the uncertainty around your career? Who are you in your financial crisis? And what's your ability to do things, right? If I don't have that safe attachment to caregivers growing up, I'm going to be put in a disempowered state in response to my context and in response to my circumstances. I am at the mercy, whatever is going on in my life. And you and I know that's just not true.
It's not true. And if it was true, it's not effective, right? I mean, having that kind of like victim mentality, I think like leads to a shit ton of depression and anxiety and, addictive behaviors, right? And it's just not a way to go through the world, So I'm curious, like, how do you do the identity work as an adult? Because I can see some of our listeners that are tuning in, they're like, well, shit, I wasn't loved as a child. I had an abusive upbringing, or I was neglected, or I was a latchkey kid and nobody really gave me any attention. I don't love myself. Am I just screwed? Like how do I go back and fix those holes now that I'm an adult man and I'm trying to, heal? What does that work look like specifically?
Well, this is what we believe at Begin Again Institute, and I think this is overall just true. So much of identity development has to do with trauma therapy, trauma healing, or trauma work. Okay, because the fact that I didn't get those things, the raw ingredients that it would take for me to develop an identity in a safe way, that is traumatic. Okay, that I didn't have those ingredients. Right, I was disconnected, unaffirmed, unseen. The object of abuse, that I didn't have all of these things. These are all traumas, right? So what we do in our work is that we identify those hurts and those wounds and those unmet needs, and we go to those memories, and we'll do trauma work and use specific trauma modalities to re-experience those events with a healthier emotional outcome. So one of the techniques that we use is called brain spotting. You bring up a memory, you focus on a spot in the room that's related to that memory, a lot of times using a pointer, and I'm not going to get into the weeds of that. But it's a trauma modality like EMDR, or a lot of the ones that people have probably heard of. And what you're doing in those things is that from a safe space as an adult who is not literally in that memory, I can return to it and observe it. There might be all sorts of lies that are embedded in that memory, that I'm not good enough, I'm shameful, I'm a disappointment, I'm weak. All of these little one sentence stories that children that have been traumatized or emotionally abandoned have. And I can observe that and expose myself to the truth of what was going on. Like, for example, that boy was doing the best that he could. That boy was doing the best that he could with what he had. Oh, he is so strong. Notice how he cared for his siblings, or notice how he tried to care for his mom in a really difficult environment, or what you get exposed to the reality and the strength of the resiliency of and the invincibility of your identity, even in the face of trauma, that couldn't squash you. Like, I was working with this guy the other day, right, of going back to this memory of him being abused in a basement by a handyman, and he goes down. So we're in that memory, and he goes down into the basement, and he finds that little boy in the corner who's really sad and scared, and he picks him up and he takes him outside, and they go play soccer. Now I'm explaining that in a really maybe beat by beat way, but for him, there's that little boy, and there's that room. I remember how that room smells. I remember what things were on the walls. I remember the furniture, and I just hate that place. And I hate him being in this place. I need to take care of him. I need to rescue him. I need to meet the unmet need. And even though it's in a memory, even though it's in my imagination, so to speak, I am responding to my neediness. I am validating my neediness. I am doing a little work of parenting for that wounded kid. And what happens when I come up out of that? Oh, gosh, I'm starting to understand a little bit why I always feel lonely. Or I'm starting to feel a lot of why, like, you know, I don't tell people about what's going on with me because I wasn't allowed to tell people what happened to me, you know. And now I'm gaining new information about myself. And then I get to reintegrate that into my identity of who I am. And I'm a survivor, that I'm strong, that I was not cared for, that I was not taught well, but I've made it this far in my life, and I'm strong enough to get better. Like, these are news stories. One of my friends, Drew Boa, he says therapy is really about restorying yourself, right? Telling yourself a new story about what your experiences were. And oftentimes, most of the time, that new story is actually closer to reality than all those negative beliefs that we had, you know.
Yeah, I love that. I think that was very well said. I think that was a really beautiful story of somebody going through and healing their trauma and really facing it, you know. And my hope is that through the work that you're doing and the show and Men's Therapy Online, it's like, that is masculinity to me, right? Like, facing that demon, facing that handyman, facing that like scary basement, like, what's more heroic than that? Versus what I think we're trained to do is like put it in a box, contain it, never talk about it again, pretend like it didn't affect us, where it's like, of course it affected us, but now let's go slay it, right? Let's go like fight this thing and heal through it to a place where we can become more integrated. And I think it takes that first step of humility of being like, yes, I do need to do some of this work, but then it's a courageous action to like face our biggest fears out there, you know, and become a fuller man, right? Really build that identity that we all deserve.
Yeah, that's so true. Like courage is the ingredient, right? And we all look at men and we think manliness has to do with courage. And I challenge guys all the time to say, oh, what is going back to that memory going to do for me? What is feeling my feelings around that going to do? Like, how is that productive? You know, guys always want to find what's productive for them. I say, well, is how you're living your life now really productive? Do you feel really productive in the way that you're doing it? And everybody's like, well, no, not really. I'm in addiction treatment, so probably not. And I said, well, why don't you try a different way of doing it and see if that's more productive? And let's flip it, man. Does it take more courage to run from your stuff or to face it? Right? Which find your masculine ethic. Like, which is it? Right? Do you have all of these emotions? Right, which your only goal in your life is to repress them and stop them, right? Which guys always ask me this question, like, well, I'm feeling sad. What do I do with that? What do I do? Like, I'm feeling all this anger now, Matt, after all of our work together. What do I do with it? And it's not going to blow your mind, Mark. It's like, well, what would you say?
Feel it, express it, right? Work with it.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't do anything with an emotion. You feel it, right? Which and something as, right, which integrated and freeing as feeling your emotions is really foreign to people that have never learned how to do that or identify what it is that they're feeling. So, you enter into this almost meditative work with these guys of what is it that's going on in me? Can I sit with it? Can I feel it and be okay? And the answer is yes, but it's just going to take a little bit of practice, right? And then I don't need to go to sex for these things because I can access them in all these other ways.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's more control over it, right? And I think for this, it's like you're unlocking, what I tell my guys, like you're unlocking like another information stream, right? The emotional stream, the intuitive stream. And I think when we're cut off from it, we make really dumb decisions, you know? So I think if we can really get in touch with like how we actually feel about things, that's great. It can be kind of a compass for our lives. Doesn't mean we have to like stop thinking or like, become an emotional wreck. I don't think that's true at all, but it gives you a kind of an internal heart compass that you can then use to know how things might actually affect you versus just kind of barreling through, which I think a lot of guys do, is we just come with a plan and then we just force the plan to happen versus being more adaptable and being more flexible and being more agile.
Right. And then what you're describing there is like someone who's opening their bandwidth to the human experience versus living it in such a narrow, restricted way. And I think the word control is really interesting in the way that you use it, because what guys will go to pornography and sex addiction for is a false idea or a false experience of control in their life. I'm going to feel, but I'm only going to feel over here. I'm going to have intimacy, but I'm only going to have it over here. I'm going to have it in this really controlled and contained and safe way. And when they think about control, that's what it is. I'm not only have to control my sexual behaviors and keep them all here, I got to control you too, because you can't have a lot of emotions if I'm not allowed to have emotions, and I need to keep you away from my secrets. So I'm going to control you and manipulate and lie to you about those things. But guess what? That's not control at all. That stuff is now in control of you and the way that you see yourself and the way that you interact with other people. You're actually out of control, and quite severely so. So what does and the way freedom look like? What does it mean to be a human in the world? Well, it's not control, right? Because we have so little control over what goes on in our life day to day. But it looks like I'm open to the experience of the world, and I can control me in the way my response is in the way. And that's about it. And then everything else, I'm just going to learn to accept on its own terms. And that's a lot. Like when guys arrive there, that sense of peacefulness and confidence and trust is really powerful. It's almost palpable, off of a person when they start living that way,
Yeah, I think it's a real initiated man. When we talk about that in our show a lot of like, I think every man has a demon. For some of us it's physical, for some of us it's emotional, for some of us it's mental, for some of us it's spiritual. But I think every boy has to slay a demon to fully become a man. And that's not age dependent, right? You can slay your demons at 55 years old, But I think doing any kind of deep work, it doesn't really matter which one, like everybody has something. And if you can really confront that and take that head on, not only will you deal with that problem, which is massive, but you'll get all the other stuff that Matt's talking about, right? You'll get this sense of being initiated, being like a confident man. You'll get a sense of gravitas. You'll know who you are finally. You'll have your values. You'll be able to deeply connect with people. I think there's 10,000 doors to do it, but I think we all need to do it, because it's just what he's saying. It's like you're just going to be controlled by these things in your life, right? The demon is going to be the puppet master of your life. So Matt, we're nearing the end of the show here. I'm curious, like, where can somebody start? Where can somebody start if they want to start to work on their porn addiction, or even if they're questioning, like, do I have a porn addiction or not? How can they start doing some of this work and becoming initiated and becoming healed?
Well, I think some of the answers are going to be really simple, and some of them are a little bit more complicated. So, like, let's do the simple ones first. I think if you are concerned that porn may be entering into that compulsive sphere, right, where it's escalating in my life, okay, then there's some avenues I need to go down to explore that, right? So, is it escalating? Am I doing it more than I used to do? Is it intensifying? Am I doing it for longer periods of time? Is it persisting in spite of consequences, like I'm getting in trouble, or my wife doesn't really like it and she's hurt by it and I'm doing it anyway, or it's affecting my work, or it's affecting my social life, and it persists in light of all those things, then I probably am dealing with something that's either a full-blown addiction or something that's headed in that direction. So think about those things, right? Frequency, intensity, and consequences, or compulsivity, escalation, and consequences. Am I doing it when I don't want to do it? What am I doing it when I'm on my way to do something else? The other thing I would recommend is on our website, beginninginstitute.com, there is a quiz that you can take that'll answer the questions as honestly as you can. And it's going to feed you back like what your level of concern should be in regard to your porn usage. So like if you're on an exploratory mission there, that's where I would start. Like, okay, is this an issue for me? The next thing that I would probably recommend is get yourself into therapy and start. It can be once a week, it can be twice a month, whatever it is, but start to do some of that exploratory work on yourself. Because if I have an issue with porn, then it's probably an emotional issue at its root. So let me start to explore what it is that I am dealing with on an emotional level. The same thing for any substance or any other type of addiction, gambling or whatever, right? Get yourself into the door with a therapist and be honest with them. And if your porn use or your sexual acting out behaviors are continuing to escalate after you're doing that work, go seek out a specialist, what we call like a certified sex addiction therapist or a CSAT. Okay. And be honest with them and be fulsome with them and the spectrum of the issues that you're dealing with, and listen to their recommendations. Okay. Now some guys are going to need higher levels of care than even that, right? Like in an inpatient setting or an intensive, like what we do at Begin Again. You're only going to find the answers to those questions by seeking out professional help. Be really careful who you talk to about this, because there is a lot of stigma around it, but professionals are safe folks to talk to about it. There's also kind of a low intensity kind of option too of go to a meeting, go online, find a sex addiction recovery group or a SA group or an SSA group. A lot of these are online. You can go on to them like a Zoom call, or there's in-person ones. Find a meeting and then go sit with other people that are struggling with this and see what resonates with you. And if this, I'll tell you this, Mark, and you probably agree. I think guys can experience a lot of success outside of the 12 steps, but the guys who work the steps seem to have a lot, like they have a lot more of those doors that you talked about open to them. Like guys that are committed to the 12 steps of recovery and are doing their therapy work, like they have a much higher likelihood of success. There's something about those steps, about renewing your relationship to yourself. And we could go on and on about the steps, right? The steps aren't designed to get you sober. They're designed to get you in relationship with yourself, right? And so get in a group, work the steps, and continue to ask people that you trust in your life, like what's the next thing that you need to be doing for your healing, and explore options for your partner. If she's discovered your addiction and discovered your harm, what does she need, or what does he need to find some healing around that betrayal in their life? Do they need to sit with a professional? Do they need to find services for people who have been betrayed? We could talk for an hour about the experience of someone who has had their life turned upside down by betrayal. That's a whole other thing, right? But those would be the initial steps that I would recommend. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, and I think it's a whole other podcast, so I'll have to have you back on to talk about partner betrayal specifically. But Matt, thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks for joining us on the show. Where can people find you and your institute online? How can they learn more about the work that you all are doing?
Yeah, it's beginagain.institute.com. You'll be able to see all of our services and all of our intensives on there, ways that you can engage with us and be a part of the healing experience. There are a lot of CSATs that we can in the area and around the country that we're connected to. So we're a great spot to call and get some resources as well. So our admissions number and our information number are also on beginagainInstitute.com. We just want to see people get better. We just want to see families heal. And So whether it's with us or somebody that we can refer you to, like, we want to wish you the best on your journey to connection with yourself and with other people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to just highlight that again, as like, whether you work with them or somebody else, I think they're really good at finding referrals and finding matches. So I think that's a great first step. So Beginning Institute, their information will be in our show notes. You'll be able to click on that. If you're curious, he did mention it's like a free online quiz that you can take and do a self-evaluation. That might be, a good anonymous place to start. If, anything in this show, you're like, oh yeah, wow, maybe that's me. I don't know. I mean, check it out, right? Like, no shame. There's a whole community, not just of professionals, but of other people that have been through it that are waiting to hear you, we want to help, and we want to help men get better and like fight their demons that are inside them. So Matt, thank you again for being on the show. I really appreciate our conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
And listeners, thank you again for tuning in. Again, make sure you like, share, subscribe, do all the socials. If you know a guy or a friend or a partner that may be struggling with porn addiction, forward this over to them. Let them hear a little bit about our words. We also have a video podcast available on YouTube, and we're on all the social medias. We're under Men's Therapy Online. So if you just Google that, we're all there. Website is menstherapy.online. You can see highlight reels, as well as see what me and Matt look like through the video podcast. So check us out, and we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.